Hello, my name is John Colquitt. I'm a specialist with the Department of Agri-Science and work for Alabama FFA. And the purpose of this presentation today is to help those that are trying to get their state FFA degree to meet the parliamentary procedure requirements in that. What I decided to do, since a number of teachers are not all that comfortable with helping students with parliamentary procedure because they haven't been exposed to it before or whatever the reason may be, thought I would try to do this today so that you can go through and you can share this with students, and then they can go through some of the fundamentals of parliamentary procedure, learn a few things, and meet those requirements. So that's our purpose today, and we will have go through several things today. I'll also include an email with it, with the script of it, and we'll also try to include a test for you. Of course, you can formulate the test. It's all up to the advisor on the state FFA degree, but we'll go through some things today that I hope will be beneficial to the students and will meet those requirements. So let's start with parliamentary procedure. It's not as big and scary as many people think it is. First of all, there are several reasons why we use parliamentary procedure. And those are some of the things that I think the students need to be tested on. Most of the time, people use a little bit of it, partial. They know a little bit about it, but then they end up making more mistakes with it. But there's some really good reasons why we have those and have Robert's Rules of Order as the book to go to with regard to our FFA meetings. So it can also help you in your chapter meetings too. So let's look at why we use parliamentary procedure. And there's several things we're going to look at here. First of all, we'll begin with it helps the organization to achieve its purpose. And we'd all like to do that when we're having a meeting, no matter if it's FFA or something else. That organization wants to achieve a goal and has purposes in mind, and it helps you to stay on course and to achieve that. Also, one of the things that we love about parliamentary procedure is that it gives equal treatment for all people. Everyone has the same rights in the organization. The president doesn't have any more rights than the newest member. So that's one of the things that's important. Another thing, majority decides. Now, in our country, we're in a democracy. We believe we're a democratic republic, but we do believe that the one with the most votes should be able to decide. And the same is true in parliamentary procedure. Majority decides, 50% plus one, whatever the vote may be, and they decide, make the decisions for the policies or the direction of the organization. It also ensures the rights for all. There are different things that you can have as rights, like we do in organizations, like in our country, but we also have it in organizations too. Every member has equal rights to do things like voting, debating, having an equal say-so in the organization. And with all of this, when you have these parts of parliamentary procedure and why we use it, it also helps us to maintain order too. That's one of the most important issues. Otherwise, you have chaos in many meetings, and I've seen some like that before. So it helps you maintain order when everyone follows the procedure as has been prescribed for you. And one thing that's vital for this that I think that most people have as a goal with regard to meetings, and that is it saves time. And everyone is all about saving time. So you can bring something up, have everyone have their say as they should, and it saves time for you to get on to other things and to be able to expedite the business that you have in a timely fashion. So I think that it saves time. So there's several things here that we'll look at. It helps the organization, equal treatment. The majority decides. It ensures the rights for all. Every member has equal rights. They can vote and debate, maintains order, and saves time. So there's some really good reasons with regard to parliamentary procedure and why we use it. So we'll start out with some basics now and just look at some motions. And the first one I wanted to start with today is actually the one that's on the bottom of the list as far as priority is concerned. Most people don't see it that way. They think you begin with the main motion, but actually as far as priority is concerned within the meeting, as far as ranking is concerned, actually the main motion's near the bottom on that. But a main motion is the topic at hand that's been brought up. It's a new item of business. The best way to define it is to say it's a new item of business. It's something that's been proposed and is going to be debated and then voted on if it's been put up in the appropriate manner. So a main motion is that topic of business. Another one that we use that most people are familiar with is adjourn. So what's the purpose of an adjourn? Just like it sounds, and we've seen those done before, that ends a meeting. So now we know how to get a topic started and we know how to end a meeting, which in many instances is very important in knowing how to do that. So adjourn is very important. And with these motions, I'll try to go through and show you how to do those. For example, a main motion with that new item of business, you'll say, I move to, and then whatever the topic would be. With an adjourn, you would say, I move to adjourn. Then once that receives a second, then you are able to vote on that and adjourn a meeting or stop that meeting. The next one we'll look at is a recess. So what's the purpose of a recess? In many instances, my students have said it's time to go out and play. But what they really mean by that is it's like you would think it would be. It's taking a break in the meeting. There are many reasons for doing a recess, so you can discuss something informally. So you can perhaps do some research and see if an item, whatever's been proposed, can be done. May have to make some phone calls or texts or whatever it may be. But a recess has a definite purpose, and it is the ability to take a break in the meeting if it passes. Now, moving on to another one. Question of privilege. A question of privilege is something that a member can do immediately by interrupting a speaker, and it's something that's done out of the ordinary. And that's the purpose of it, to do something that would normally be out of order. And so you would stand up and say, question of privilege. You don't have to have recognition. You can interrupt the speaker, because in many instances, it has something to do with that member's ability to be able to understand and proceed with regard to the meeting. For example, if you can't hear the speaker, if you can't hear what's going on and you have to make adjustments to be able to do that, you stand up and say question of privilege. The chairman would automatically identify you then and say, state your question. You don't have to have recognition, but they'll say, state your question, and then you present what your question is at that point. Then we have lay on the table. That's an instance where, let's say you have someone that comes in and you need to set aside the business that's on the floor at that particular time. So you are able to do that. So a lay on the table, the purpose of it is setting aside that business, that debate, that main motion at that time. So as a result of that, you've got the purpose, and it's really easy to do. You would stand up and say, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman. They will recognize you, and you say, I move to lay the motion on the table. And once it receives a second, then you go to a vote and see whether or not it will be laid on the table or not. So that's a motion, too, that many people use and misuse, by the way. Another motion that is important, and let's say people have been going on for quite a while with debate and you need to proceed on with the meeting. One of the things you can do is end debate. Now, we call that previous question. And that's what previous question does if it passes. The purpose of it is to end debate. And if it passes, it ends debate immediately on that motion. And you can go ahead and get to the vote after it's been debated several times. And it requires a 2/3 vote. You do have to have recognition for it, but a previous question allows you to end debate. Then another one, too, that has to do with debate is limit or extend debate. Now, we have standard debate in parliamentary procedure. Every motion that you have, the standard amount of times you can debate is twice per member, and you can debate that motion 10 minutes per debate. So that's the standard. So if you want to change that to lessen it or extend it, maybe you need more time on it, or maybe you need less time and people are going back and forth with each other and saying the same thing, then you can certainly limit debate. And most of the time it's limited instead of extended in most meetings that we have. So that's the purpose of it. And it does change that standard debate. You would stand up and say, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I move to limit debate to 5 more minutes or to 10 more minutes or to 1 more debate per speaker. There are a lot of different ways you can go about doing that. Then once it has a second, you go immediately to a vote. It requires a 2/3 vote for passage because you're taking away from the rights of others perhaps to debate if they want to. So it does change the standard debate. So that's the purpose of it and the way that you do it. All right, another motion that we have is to postpone definitely, or postpone, you'll see it written up in Robert's rules and in the chart of motions there, postpone to a certain time or postpone definitely. The purpose of that is to put off a decision on that motion to a later specified time. In other words, you're saying, I want to do it at the next meeting or the March meeting or whatever it may be, how you set that up. That postpone puts that motion off maybe perhaps to do discussion, to find out more things about it, to see what the members' ideas about that are, the support that's for it. So postpone definitely has purposes along those lines and will enable you to get more information to make a better decision. So you would stand up and say, Mr. Chairman, they would call on you and you'd say, I move to postpone the motion to our next regularly scheduled meeting. It would get a second, and then you debate this motion. So that's one of those that you can discuss whether or not you need to postpone it or not. Then we go on to one that is utilized quite a bit, and that's referred to a committee. And sometimes they call it to commit. So the purpose of that motion is to give that motion to a smaller group, perhaps to do research, make decisions, gain information that would enable them to better serve the organization, to tell them whether they should pass it or not. In many instances, I've seen organizations say, well, once that committee's got it, it's their decision, but it's actually not. The entire organization still has to make a decision. They can make recommendations. They can give a report, of course, but it's still up to that organization to be able to pass or fail that motion that was given. And it's real easy to do if you go through and practice that, but it has some requirements contained within it. And I'll give you an example of it. You would say, I move to refer the motion to a committee, and you have to designate how many of 3 appointed by the chair or the president or elected by the group, whatever it would be. There are a lot of different ways you can do that to report back at the next meeting. So you have to have how many people are on it. You're supposed to include how they're to be elected and when they're supposed to report back. So you would say, I move to refer the motion to a committee of 3 appointed by the chair to report back at the next meeting. That's just an example of it. And you can debate that motion. So it's one that you can learn a lot from and gain a lot of insight into whether that should pass or not. So that's referred to a committee. Then you've got an amend. Now, an amend is really easy to explain. All you're doing is taking that main motion and making changes to it, adaptations of it, changing it in some way, changing the wording. You can take out part of it, add to part of it, whatever it may be. You can insert something into the middle of it somewhere if you think it needs to be. If you don't have a time or a date on that original main motion, maybe perhaps that's what you would like to add. But this is the way you do it. You would say, I move to, after gaining recognition, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I move to amend the motion by striking out the words 7 o'clock. Maybe that's not a good time to have it. So you strike out that. And then you would debate that amend and decide whether or not that's something you would like to do as an organization and as a body moving forward. So that's the purpose of an amend, to just change that motion in some way, to add to or take something away from that particular motion. Then we've got postpone indefinitely. Now, the postpone indefinitely, what it essentially does is kills that main motion. In many instances, what people do is to try to determine the actual support for a motion. They'll put up a postpone and see if the body or the organization wants to pass it or not. So what you do is essentially do away with the main motion from that point forward. And it could come back up later, but it's one of those things that if it passes, you see the support with it. So it kills a motion or ends that motion at that particular point. So those are several of the motions. And now one of the things I'd like to do is go through a main motion, because we have all seen those done before in organizations. I'd like to go through the steps of that so you can present that main motion. What the person would do would rise and gain the chair, gain his or her attention, and call Mr. or Madam Chairman. And then the chairman would call on them, say the member or their name or something to recognize them. Then they have the floor. Then they would state the motion. I move to. For example, you always say I move to, not I make a motion that we, or that kind of thing, or just start saying what you want to do. You say, I move to have a sale for the chapter, to have a party for the organization, to have a fundraiser, a rodeo, a fair, a greenhouse sale, or whatever it may be. There are several different types of main motions that you can do, and you can dream those up, as it were, whatever that organization would like to do. But you say, you rise, call on the chair, and say, I move to, state that motion, and then that motion must receive a second at that point. And after receiving a second, and that person doesn't have to be recognized, they can just, from their chair, say second, and then the chair will restate that motion. At that point, once he restates it, she restates it, then it's the bodies or the ownership at that point is by the organization. And then you debate that motion. And we've talked about the amount of debate that you can do. You can't supersede two unless something's changed. And after debate has ended, then you go to a vote. So those are several things there that with regard to presenting a main motion. And I hope you remember those steps because that's part of the questions on the test that I'll include with this. A couple of terms I think you need to know, and they're real simple terms actually. One of the terms you need to know is majority. I did mention this earlier, but the definition of a majority is 50% plus one. In other words, one more than that of the less. For example, you'd have to have 16 to 15 for it to be a majority. Now, a tie isn't a majority. So you have to have one more than the other side to be able to pass a main motion there. So that's what a majority is. 50. I always tell my students 50% plus one. So that's a good way of defining that. And then another term I'd like for you to know too is the chair. So who is the chair? What is the chair? It's not something that you can sit in. What we're talking about there is the person that is presiding over the meeting and is making decisions and carries out, helps the organization carry out motions and debate and whatever may arise in that motion with what the organization is doing. So those are several terms there that we'll look at, that we've looked at, and I hope that we have been able to do some things that will be beneficial for you. I'm going to now offer, if you have any questions about this, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. My name is John Colquitt. You can find me on the Alabama FFA website. I'm the Area 5 person there that you can go to, an improvement specialist there. So you get in touch with me, and my email is on there. My phone number is 334-782-4484. I hope this is beneficial to you. If you ag teachers need to get in touch with me, I'll be glad to send you some sample tests so they can meet those requirements, because we want a lot of people to get the state FFA degree that have qualified for it. And I would encourage them to do that. And I appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you. Take care.